Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is Mark Synek, and I'm a principal at SBI, a sales and marketing consultancy dedicated to helping you make your number. With me today is one of SBI's partners and my co-host, John Staples. How you doing, John?
Very well, Mark.
To all of you listening or watching, thanks for joining us today. Our purpose is to help you make your number by speaking with business experts about things you are dealing with in real life in your company. We have a great guest today. His name is Scott Brinker, and he's the author of ChiefMartech.com, a blog that examines the intersection of marketing, technology, and management, and he's the program chair of the MarTech conference. He's a practicing marketing technologist, and he's also the CTO of Ion Interactive, which is a marketing software company that provides a platform for producing and delivering interactive content. He has degrees in computer science from Columbia and Harvard, and an MBA from MIT. So Scott, safe to say you are the smartest guy in the room today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I don't know about the smartest, but certainly the one with the largest student debt.
You can bet on it, yeah.
Nice. I'm dealing with that with my kids now, Scott, so thanks for that one. Scott, today we're going to use a section of SBI's revenue growth methodology to guide our conversation, specifically pages 111 to 113 and 146 to 150 of the report. Listeners who may want to follow along at home can download a copy of this methodology at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. Scott, you ready to go?
Let's hit it.
All right.
Scott, we want to spend some time today discussing step 5 of our marketing strategy methodology, and specifically the marketing operations and systems pieces, and how to leverage different technologies to improve productivity. This is where you automate your core marketing business processes to increase the productivity of the marketing organization by minimizing the administrative burden. So, Scott, I'd like to start with a very broad question, and then we'll sharpen our approach based upon your response. Marketing ops is a relatively new discipline, and it's largely a result of the fact that the number of marketing channels has dramatically increased, bringing all the associated complexity you'd expect with it. So in your work, do you see confusion about how to apply the function of marketing ops to the organization?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. In some ways, marketing ops has been around for a while, but its scope was pretty limited. They were essentially the report folks. They were the data folks. They were the folks who scrubbed the Excel spreadsheets to make sure, okay, here's how our budget was spent. Here's, the returns we got on it. An important role, but exactly as you mentioned here, over the past few years, the scope of marketing operations has exploded, largely as a function of all these additional channels and touch points that we're managing with customers and prospects. But even as part of that, sort of behind the scenes, is this explosion of all these marketing technologies and all these much larger sets of data that now marketing has access to. And by default, marketing operations has become the team responsible for managing this, but it's a much bigger mission than they had originally signed up for.
Hey, on that subject, Scott, what do you see some of the challenges are for just the people side of it? Is it to struggle to find the right people or right structure, or all of the above?
So one of the challenges is this dichotomy between how we think about things in innovation and how we think about things in operations. Right? The simplest version would be, innovation is very much about exploring possibilities and doing a lot of experimentation, while when we get on the operations side, what we're really looking to do is exploit the things we know that work, and we really try and go to more standardization. And I think the difficulty for marketing operations today is they're kind of trying to wear both hats. On one hand, they have this responsibility for really bringing some process and discipline and some standardization to marketing's tool sets and data. But at the same time, they're sort of at that nexus of having to help the organization explore these new technologies and figure out new ways to leverage them. And there's a tension between those two things.
Okay, I'll move on to my next question here. So one of the critical elements of marketing ops is setting the objectives for the team and developing a data plan that's executable. For our listeners who might be contemplating implementing marketing ops, how would you advise them to do these things?
Wow, I guess there's two sides to approach it, the supply side and the demand side. One is, what is the data we want? What is the data we're actually going to be able to productively harness? Not just in marketing, but I think more importantly is what sort of data are we able to leverage even further downstream as marketing makes the handoff into sales? And I think that's a question a lot of companies have a difficult time answering right now. The part of the big data movement has got us in mode of, well, we're collecting all this data. We've got reams of data, all data, lots of it. No, we're not exactly sure what it means or how we're going to leverage it. So I think that sort of demand side of really mapping out what data can we productively harness is much more important than, say, the supply side of figuring out, okay, we've got all this data coming from all these different sources. How do we structure it? How do we manage it? How do we process it?
Scott, that's really interesting, and especially around the way you kind of characterize it as supply versus demand. And then I love the comment about the handoff to sales as well, because sometimes it feels like marketing produces these things in a vacuum with the goal of producing them, rather than the goal of producing something that can be handed off to sales, and understanding that sales is kind of the customer in that sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. No, I think that's kind of representative of a pattern that we're wrestling with inside marketing, between marketing and sales, between marketing and IT, is the corporation as we know it has sort of blossomed, for many decades in this very siloed approach. And, we say silo is a bad thing now, but, originally the whole point of it was the ability to provide a structure that could scale. And so that one team could, move at a certain pace without having to be interlinked and intercoordinated very, very tightly with another group. The problem, of course, is in the actual business environment today, our customers, our prospects, the kinds of interactions they're demanding from us, they expect of us, really requires a much greater synchronization across the different facets of marketing, between marketing and sales. And that is what we're wrestling with is, okay, how do we start crossing these silos and get to a place where instead of just having handoffs, we really do have a continuous collaboration between these teams?
Yeah. Scott, that's really insightful stuff. Before we continue, I'd like to take a quick break to make our audience aware of a new offering, but when we return, we're going to do a deeper dive with Scott. Scott, we'll be right back with you.
Do you have too many things to do and not enough time to do them? Is finding time to learn best practices almost impossible? The SBI Podcast is your solution. Turn time spent exercising, commuting, and traveling into productive learning time with a subscription to the SBI Podcast. SBI Podcast listeners get unique insight into real-world sales and marketing issues through interviews with your industry peers every week. Find us on iTunes by searching for Sales Benchmark Index Podcast and subscribe today.
Welcome back. My name is Mark Synek, and I'm a principal with SBI. With me today is one of SBI's partners and my co-host, John Staples, and our guest today is Scott Brinker, the author of ChiefMartech.com. Scott's also the CTO of Ion Interactive. Today, Scott's educating us about how he thinks about marketing ops and the systems elements of marketing strategy, and we're using SBI's revenue growth methodology to do this. Now, Scott, you have a strong point of view on the technical integration of marketing technology. You really demystify it. And in fact, I was going back and reading some of your blogs preparing for this conversation, and in one of the blogs you say, and I'm quoting you here, "Integration is getting easier. Marketing, however, is not. Then you go on to talk about, and again I'm quoting, the complexity of the customer journey and how customer touchpoints are multiplying in a kaleidoscopic fashion around us, which is really perfectly put. Can I ask you to kind of go deeper and elaborate on that statement?
Sure. That post came up in response to a study that had been conducted, I believe, by the group, I want to say Ascend 2, where essentially they were asking marketers what stands between you and success in being able to leverage marketing technology. And at the very top of the list, everyone's like, oh, integration. Integration is hard. If only this stuff was integrated, everything would be perfect. And then much further down the list, they had these things of like, oh, well, actually, we don't really understand the new buyer's journey, and actually we're having a hard time getting executive buy-in, and our culture doesn't seem to be really well aligned to what this new world is. And as a technologist myself, I mean, I'll acknowledge the integration challenges are real, but they're not insurmountable. And a lot of the technology vendors in the space are working really, really hard to ease the challenges of getting these systems to talk together. But it's those other things of, really getting an understanding of how are we going to apply this technology, even if it was perfectly integrated, how are we going to apply it, to affect these customer experiences? How are we going to use it to change the way our business actually operates given these new tools? That, to me, seems like where the real challenge lies, and we should be putting a lot more energy and emphasis on figuring those problems out.
Hey, Scott, that was fantastic. Where do you see maybe the challenges that your clients run into when it comes to implementing any type of technology? And I'm specifically focused on alignment with sales.
Yeah, that's something I feel personally very passionate about. To me, I feel that the handoff of data between marketing and sales is incredibly primitive at this point. That for all this data and all these interactions that we talk about, essentially most of what we hand off is still essentially contact records, maybe with a little bit of black box lead scoring. And then in some cases, if you've got, a marketing automation system, maybe you get access to what they call digital body language, right? This big, long dump of, and here's the 500 touches we've had with this person, over the past 2 years. Hope you can make sense of that. I don't know. It just feels like if we're really getting to a point in marketing where we're starting to understand customers based on their digital interactions a little bit better, if we're able to start collecting more meaningful data from them, I do a lot of work with interactive content. So with interactive content, right, marketing can produce these things like assessment tools and calculators and configurators where they get the prospects to just provide a tremendous amount of data about themselves and their company and their situation. There are very, very few companies right now where that data is being collected by marketing and then handed off to sales in a way that the sales team can really activate on it, can really, engage with the prospect using it.
That's really a great lead-in to my next question, because I kind of wanted to go back to this concept of customer touch points again. So let's say for a moment, let's assume that my company is doing a pretty good job through some type of interactive content of tracking customer touch points. How do I then adjust my strategy or even think about my strategy in real time based on the data that I'm getting back?
It's a great question. I think, you have the framework, at the beginning of your report, about the difference between strategy and tactics. I kind of feel actually a lot of these data things can be tactical. If we step back and we treat the strategy as saying, okay, we have a fundamental offering to the market. Perhaps we have a set of segmentations that we know, this segment is looking for the solution in this form, a different segment, a different form, and so on. I think the strategy for a lot of companies here, can be informed by the data, but doesn't always have to revolve around that actual on-the-ground interactions between marketing and the prospects in the digital domain. Where I think we fail is actually much more on the tactical level, is we are getting this data, we are getting customers engaged who are intrigued by what our offering is, but we're having a very difficult time packaging that data in a meaningful way for the handoff between marketing and sales.
Well, that was great, Scott. Hey, thanks. One of the things that we see with our clients, and it's big data, is just it's here and it's very exhausting, let's call it. Let's start with that. We usually sit down with our clients and run through KPI mappings, which is an exhaustive activity, to say the least. But one data metric I wanted to focus on with you today, because our clients get asked all the time, especially marketing ops. So, hey, tell me where my $5 million investment in marketing is going. Can you tell me the return on my marketing investment? Your perspective on that and how you've seen clients be successful in measuring the return on their marketing investment.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the fundamental problem there is attribution. We still, to this day, have a very fuzzy model of how we even think about, okay, we know we had a touch point with a customer through this ad campaign, right? That's a fact. We measured the touch point. We know they came and downloaded this white paper. Okay, that's a factual point. We have all these factual points, but the problem is we can't actually get into the prospect's head to truly weight which of those touch points had what percentage of influence on their decision to move forward or not move forward. And in particular, there's a bunch of data that we just never get access to. People still interact with their own colleagues, their own networks outside of our purview. A lot of research continues to show that, particularly for, larger purchase items, it's recommendations from peers that continue to have the greatest influence, on a lot of these sales opportunities. And so, because we don't have all the data and we don't necessarily have a scientific way to manage attribution to the data we do have, it's fuzzy. And my philosophy is I think we should just be transparent about that. We should be clear about what the data is. We should show a few different models of saying, okay, if you weighted this way, and here's the reason why we think that weighting makes sense, this is what the picture looks like, and this was, what we would suggest we continue to do with our investment. But I think the moment you start representing it as somehow fact instead of theory, you start to get into an indefensible place.
Well, I think we could set up a separate show to talk about the concept of multi-channel attribution and how you weight different types of attribution and how much influence did the blog article have versus the white paper versus the sales rep's first contact or anything else. But for now, in the interest of kind of moving on to some other topics, I'd like to take another quick break, Scott, if we could, to educate today's listeners on how to subscribe to SBI TV, and we will be right back.
You are watching SBI TV. This is a monthly web TV show featuring guests just like you, executives trying to grow their revenues. Each month, you can peek behind the scenes and watch your peers discuss their strategies for how they make their numbers. You are not going to want to miss this.
Welcome back. My name is Mark Synek, and I'm a principal with SBI. With me today is one of SBI's partners, John Staples, and our guest today is Scott Brinker. We've had a wide-ranging conversation with Scott so far, all around marketing, operations, systems, and tracking customer touch points, attribution of revenue, a lot of different topics. Scott, for this segment, I want to mix it up, and I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. I'd like to play a word association game with you.
Oh, that sounds fun.
If you're brave enough. Now, as discussed, there are so many different technologies available to the modern marketer. I'd like to throw out several different types to you and get you to respond off the top of your head with one or two sentences summarizing your thoughts on that particular technology. Are you up for it?
Let's do it.
All right, I got a number for you. So we're going to start with marketing automation.
Marketing automation.
Gotta go quick. Gotta go quick, Scott.
Okay. The campaign management in the digital world.
Okay, CRM.
The system of record.
Love it. Email marketing.
The source of all our spam.
Website analytics.
Very useful, but often misused.
Oh, okay. Content management system, or CMS.
If CRM is the system of record for our customer, the CMS is our system of record for our content, our marketing assets.
Okay. Social media management.
Again, very useful, often misused, often overplayed.
Here's one, predictive analytics.
Very powerful, but requires a lot of work to get the models to be accurate.
Okay, and the last one, social collaboration.
Possibly the best out of the list. We were talking earlier here about, the breaking down of silos and finding better ways for companies to develop new ways of working together. And I think some of the innovation in the social collaboration space is proving very powerful in that regard.
Hey, thanks, Scott, for that. I'm a data guy, so I'm going to go to the predictive analytics on a couple of follow-up questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So everybody wants to be more predictive with their data. What do you typically see in the market that you recommend the marketing ops folks do to try to be more predictive? Because I keep coming back to the question on, I'm spending all this money in marketing. I want to be more predictive in my data analysis. And how can we help the folks on the audience today with that problem?
Sure. So I think where I've seen predictive analytics be most successful is when the domain is very well defined. For instance, like a classic example for predictive analytics is we've got a bunch of touch points on leads, instead of using an old-fashioned scoring model where, we try and come up with some heuristic of saying 2 points for this, 3 points for that, 7 points for this other thing, to be able to expose a predictive algorithm to all the data sources we have on leads, and then also show that algorithm historically how those leads have translated into different customers or, wins or losses. I think that's actually a terrific domain for predictive analytics to then be able to provide a more accurate lead scoring. The challenges there is, again, to really get that to work well, those predictive algorithms need access to as much of the data as possible. And that tends to be a fairly evolved. The integration work to actually get that set up and make it really effective tends to be fairly labor intensive. But once you get that, that's pretty good. And then the other challenge there, of course, is predictive analytics are based on historical information. And so if you are in a market where the competitive environment, where any dimension of the market is changing rapidly, the efficacy of predictive analytics starts to degrade pretty quickly.
Yeah, because they're kind of essentially backwards looking, and is that your point, Scott?
Yes. Yeah, and then you're making assumptions based on what the world had been like for the past 2 years.
Right.
And if it's a different world now, that can actually lead you astray.
Makes sense.
I mean, I think what we see quite a bit is the lack of patience from the different parts of the organization. Sales, they want everything right now, just hand it to me. And in marketing, there's a certain patience that you need to have in order to be, prior to you handing off anything over to sales. Sales will go back and want to pull it forward as fast as possible when marketing really understands that, hey, it's about patience, pace, and making sure that the buyer's ready to go when you do hand it off to sales. Because if not, you end up with all kinds of different alignment issues down the road.
Yeah, and I think actually, the action-oriented nature of sales is actually one of the reasons I think predictive analytics in that mode works, more or less, is because even if the predictive analytics isn't tremendously accurate, if all it's doing is giving at least a reasonable edge, increasing the likelihood that the salesperson is going to, more often reach out to the right person at the right time, that's a great edge. And salespeople take very resourceful for taking advantage of that. So I do sort of lean towards the bias for action with a lot of that information, even if it's acknowledged as being, something that's still developing. It's not perfect.
Got it.
I just got one more question if we've got a couple of minutes here. So you said social collaboration was the best of the list there. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm curious.
So I think, this notion of rethinking how the marketing team works together, trying to break down some of the silos within marketing, and then also how the marketing team can collaborate more effectively with both sales and IT and, probably customer service in a lot of organizations as well, too. A lot of the most interesting social collaboration tools to me are those that are enterprise social collaboration, right? There are things like Slack, this ability to just start to break down the formal walls and allow people to do more real-time, purpose-driven interactions. Let's get this little group together. There's an opportunity here. Let's talk about this. It's in a state right now where it's, still emerging. I mean, we're still figuring out the best practices for that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if we all agree that we need to change the way the organization operates to be more collaborative across these functions, I think that's one of the most promising areas of technology right now.
It's still really in a sense in its infancy in terms of how different companies are not only everything you mentioned, but also attempting to use it to drive down their internal costs and be able to provide a more responsive environment to the customer, correct?
Absolutely.
So, Scott, let's take one more break, if we could, real quick. And when we come back, Scott, I'd like to discuss with you what to do next if you want to evaluate your current marketing operations function or the systems you're using to automate your marketing function. Now, if you liked listening to Scott and you want access to more peer-driven best practices, here's how to subscribe to the SBI blog.
Each day, you receive hundreds of emails, tons of text messages, countless telephone calls, and sit in too many meetings. How do you find ideas to make the number with all this noise? The SBI blog filters all this nonsense for you and presents only first-rate ideas to make the number. Simplify your life. Subscribe to one blog and read the best content. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com and subscribe today.
Welcome back, everyone. Scott, let's wrap this thing up. I'd like you, if you would, to speak directly to our audience today and specifically to the marketing and marketing ops leaders who may be listening. What are the 2 or 3 things they should do immediately following this show to evaluate their need for marketing operations and their existing marketing systems?
Sure. Wow, that's kind of a big mission to sum up here.
I know, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
I think one of the people I follow in the marketing technology space, David Robb, who writes a blog, Customer Experience Matrix, is a really great way of presenting this, which is just to make sure you're clear on the hierarchy of what problem you're solving. So many people rush into solving a marketing technology problem before they've taken the effort to step back and say, well, what's actually our larger marketing strategy that technology would support? And for that matter, what's the larger business strategy in which that marketing strategy is trying to support? Most of the companies that we encounter, frankly, are not clear about the relationship between the business strategy and the marketing strategy. And I think before you get that really crystallized, trying to dive deeper down into, well, how do we fix the marketing operations piece of this, is putting the cart before the horse.
Great point, Scott. Okay, what does all this mean to you, the audience? The marketing organization cannot make its number if the leadership doesn't have a clearly articulated strategy which takes into consideration the elements we've touched on today. This is why you care. If you want to make sure you get this right, get a copy of this year's SBI report called How to Make Your Number in 2016 at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. If you feel you might need a little help with this reviewing the report, you can go to Sales Benchmark Index and sign up for a workshop and speak to one of our experts around strategic alignment.
Scott, thank you for letting us put you on the spot today. I really appreciate it. John appreciates it, and our audience benefited greatly.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been a delightful conversation.
I also want to thank our audience for tuning in. The show is becoming very popular, and with this popularity comes the ability to get great guests like Scott, who we had today. So thank you, and we wish you much success as you try to make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.